take their widgets home to all parts of the country. Look at all that money the widget builder has taken in from the sale of his widgets.
We have huge industries, public relations industries, monstrous industry, advertising and so on, which are designed from infancy to try to mold people into this desired pattern.
Take, say, sports. That's another crucial example of the indoctrination system, in my view. For one thing, because it offers people something to pay attention to that's of no importance. That keeps them from worrying about, keeps them from worrying about things that matter to their lives that they might have some idea about doing something about. And in fact, it's striking to see the intelligence that's used by ordinary people in sports. I mean, you listen to radio stations where people call in. They have the most exotic information and understanding about, all kind of arcane issues. And the press undoubtedly does a lot with this. I remember in high school already, I was pretty old, I suddenly asked myself at one point, why do I care if my high school team wins the football game? I mean, I don't know anybody on the team, They have nothing to do with me. I mean, why am I cheering for my team? It doesn't make any sense, But the point is, it does make sense. It's a way of building up irrational attitudes of submission to authority, and group cohesion behind leadership elements. In fact, it's training in irrational jingoism. That's also a feature of competitive sports. I think if you look closely at these things, I think typically they do have functions. And that's why energy is devoted to supporting them and creating a basis for them, and advertisers are willing to pay for them and so on.
Politics and Hollywood's images are linked. They reinforce one another. Policy enforces mythical images. Mythical images help enforce policy. Jack Valente, president of the Motion Picture Association of America, has said, quote, Washington and Hollywood spring from the same DNA, end quote.
I think somebody fell off the roof. Maybe he could sing, but he couldn't fly.
Apologies, oh patient one.
You have it then.
I had to slit a few throats, but I got it.
Disney's Aladdin was seen by millions of children worldwide. It was hailed as one of Disney's finest accomplishments. But the film recycled every old degrading stereotype from Hollywood's silent black and white past. In my latest book, Real Bad Arabs, How Hollywood Vilifies a People, I looked at more than 1,000 films. Films ranging from the earliest, most obscure days of Hollywood to today's biggest blockbuster. And what I tried to do is to make visible what too many of us seem not to see. A dangerously consistent pattern of hateful Arab stereotypes. Stereotypes that rob an entire people of their humanity. All aspects of our culture project the Arab as villain. That is a given. There is no deviation. We have taken a few structured images and repeated them over and over again. The Arab image began to change immediately after World War II. There were three things that impacted the change. The Palestinian-Israeli conflict, in which the United States has unequivocally supported Israel. The Arab oil embargo in the 70s, which angered Americans when gas prices went through the ceiling. And the Iranian Revolution. If we look at the anti-Semitic propaganda of the Nazis, at its core is an identical type of economic threat. This economic myth even made its way into children's books. Sadly, the popular image of Jews in Nazi propaganda resembles the popular image of Arabs in some of our most beloved Hollywood movies. The only difference being that the Arab usually wears a robe and headdress. To solidify Washington's connection with Hollywood, simply look at the films produced in cooperation with the Department of Defense, showing our men and women in the armed forces killing Arabs at random. We suddenly learned that the little girl we've been sympathizing with, the very girl whose humanity and innocence may have broken down our stereotypes, well, she's no better than those other Yemeni terrorists. As a result, when Samuel L. Jackson delivers the key line, we're now on his side. Why does this matter? Because in the end, the massacre of even women and children has been justified and applauded. It's a slaughter, yes, but it's a righteous slaughter.
Sergeant Mack.
Sir?
Contact all stations. Mission complete.
The humanity is not there. And if we cannot see the Arab humanity, what's left? If we feel nothing, if we feel that Arabs are not like us, or not like anyone else, then let's kill them all. Then they deserve to die, right? We are at war with Iraq. We went to war in March of 2003. But didn't our entrance to the war, wasn't that made a lot easier, primarily because for more than a century we had been vilifying all things Arab?
Oh, I come from a land, from a faraway place, where the caravan camels roam, where they cut off your ear if they don't like your pace. It's barbaric, but hey, it's home.
The United States is not a totalitarian state, so you don't get a propaganda line. What you get is something much more subtle but similar, namely a vigorous debate within a framework of fixed and unquestionable presuppositions. And it's those presuppositions that are the propaganda line. So take, say the war in Vietnam, anything you like. War in Vietnam, the presupposition is, well, a quote from the left end, Anthony Lewis. We began with blundering efforts to do good, but by 1969 we found that it was a disaster which was too costly for ourselves. So therefore we should get out. That's the left. The right says, you're selling us out. We can win if we go in and fight harder. All of it assumes that the U.S. attack against South Vietnam was a defense of South Vietnam, that it was an effort to do good, and then we can debate the tactics. That's perfect propaganda. If dictators had any brains, they'd do the same thing. But what's interesting is the nature of the criticism. It's purely tactical. You thought the tactics weren't going to work. They worked fine. So therefore, everything was right. It's the only question you can ask. We didn't ask that question about the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. Or take, say, the Russian invasion of, take, say, Czechoslovakia in 1968. Tactics worked fine. Didn't kill a lot of people. So what was wrong with it? Well, we all know what was wrong with it. It didn't matter that it worked. It's irrelevant. It didn't matter that they didn't kill many people. What mattered is what they were up to. But that kind of question you cannot ask about ourselves. If you ask that about ourselves, in fact, it doesn't even happen. But there's a whole just to prevent the heresy, even though it barely exists. There's a very impressive array of devices that have been constructed just in case the heresy of being honest ever arises. There are even terms that are used, like moral relativism. Moral relativism means we apply the same standards to ourselves that we apply to others. Or moral equivalence. Absurd notion, I think, was invented by Jean Kirkpatrick, as far as I recall, to prevent looking at ourselves. Or take, say, anti-Americanism. That's a notion that's used, as far as I know, only in totalitarian states. So in the Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union, to be anti-Soviet was a terrible crime. If under the Brazilian generals, to be anti-Brazilian was a crime. Now, were the Russian dissidents anti-Russian? Of course not. No. They were opposed to the policies of the state, in favor of helping the people. But in an intellectual culture that has no conception of democracy, it becomes anti-Americanism.
It is dangerous to cede to the Indian government or the American government or anyone for that matter the right to define what India or America are or ought to be. Nationalism of one kind or another was the cause of most of the genocide of the 20th century. Flags are bits of colored cloth that governments use first to shrink wrap people's brains and then as ceremonial shrouds to bury the dead.
You say that what the media do is to ignore certain kinds of atrocities that are committed by us and our friends and to play up enormously atrocities that are committed by them and our enemies.
Take a look, say, at the book that Edward Herman and I wrote on this topic. In it, we discuss three kinds of atrocities. What we call benign bloodbaths, which nobody cares about, constructive bloodbaths, which are the ones we like, and nefarious bloodbaths, which are the ones that the bad guys do. What you'd predict, if you think it through, is that our discussion of the constructive bloodbaths would be ignored, because to reveal the fact that the media welcomed huge bloodbaths, as they did, would not be very conducive to the interests of power or to the media. It would also expose the fraud about the apparent anger over nefarious bloodbaths. So you'd expect the constructive bloodbaths to be ignored. As far as the benign bloodbaths are concerned, you might expect an occasional statement, since it's, the fact that the media ignored the benign bloodbaths doesn't show such terrible things. It doesn't, at least they didn't applaud them. And as long as you can exclude the role of the United States in being involved in them, not terrible, maybe a few odd comments. With regard to the nefarious bloodbaths, what you'd expect is fury and venom over the fact that the media, that the fabrications over bloodbaths of the enemy were exposed as a fraud. And that's important, and that can be used. It can be used, in fact, to defame the critics. See, if you show that people are lying about the crimes of official enemies, you can easily distort that into a defense of those crimes.
It's a failure of the imagination, an inability to see the world in terms other than those the establishment has set out for you. If you're not a Bushi, you're a Taliban. If you don't love us, you hate us. If you're not good, you're evil. If you're not with us, you're with the terrorists.
It's not the case, as the naive might think, that indoctrination is inconsistent with democracy. Rather, it's the essence of democracy. The point is that in a military state or a feudal state or what we would nowadays call a totalitarian state, it doesn't much matter what people think, because you've got a bludgeon over their head and you can control what they do. But when the state loses the bludgeon, when you can't control people by force, and when the voice of the people can be heard, you have this problem. It may make people so curious and so arrogant that they don't have the humility to submit to a civil rule, and therefore you have to control what people think.
You write in Manufacturing Consent that it's the primary function of the mass media in the United States to mobilize public support for the special interests that dominate the government and the private sector. What are those interests?
Well, if you want to understand the way any society works, ours or any other, the first place to look is